Chapter 22. Friar Christopher Mayor, far from pallid, wearing no black beyond his queue tie, neither wiry nor unnaturally fit, in manner as free of the suave as of the pinguid, seems scarcely any Englishman's idea of a Jesuit. Yet he will confess that earlier in life, during his adventures in Italy with Friar Boscovich, in fact, he took time better used in spiritual work to cultivate a more Loyolan image, proving quite unsuccessful at it, however, remaining fair and spindle-shaped as when he stepped off the boat, failing to rid his speech of Geordie coloration, nor ever achieving that opaque effect of a stiletto waver stuffed into a churchly frock, which distinguishes el auténtico. Mayor awaits Dixon in Emerson's front parlour. Outside, the traffic in and out of Haworth creaks and whistles and clops. Those bound from Teesside across the fells take a last opportunity to hark human speech before the long miles and unspoken of but too well known visits toward the end of the day, when the cooled light above the spoil heaps favours them. And if any hint of the sinister were to accompany this priest, 'twould be well in that northern bones and blood tradition of beings like Hob Headless, said to haunt the road between Haworth and Neasham, all of whose former neighbours were agreed upon what a wholesome individual he had once seemed. Emerson, bustling into the room bearing the remains of a bloat herring from breakfast, directly adjoining upon the plate an oxtail from several meals ago, and something that may once have been a haggis, cries, "Now clap yourselves down," in an unnaturally vivacious tone. 'Tis no great leap for most to imagine William Emerson a wizard. Interest in the dark arts is ever miasmatic in Durham, as if rising from the coal beds. Old as draconic incursion, the scaly visitors drawn by the familiar odours of sulphur and burning, not to mention ghosts in every tavern and cannibals impossible to defeat ranging the fells. Seekers come in from all round to Haworth, where Emerson is ever available to cast a horoscope, mix up a filter, find a stolen purse. Not all his feats are benevolent. Once, out of annoyance, he kept a neighbour lad in a tree for most of the day, unable to stir, let alone descend, using a form of the very technique which has found its late exponent in Dr. Mesmer. In Paris, comments cousin Depew, his father happening for a moment to be out of the room, "'Tis all the rage. Indeed, I have been mesmerized." "What?" Athelma needling in among a general murmur of dubiety. "By Mesmer himself, I suppose?" "Yes, and Dr. M. was also kind enough to instruct some of us in what he knew." "Mesmer charges 100, Lewis. 'Tis well known. cries Euphy. That's £85 Brit. Where's your poor father getting money like that? Oh, Franz gave us a price, as there were so many of us who wished to learn. By foregoing 1 pint per evening for a stretch somewhat longer than Lent, I soon had replenished my funds. In fact, I don't ever recall telling Pa about it, and would be obliged, dear cousin, that is, peach not is ever my policy, Depew. I've become quite good at the mesmeric arts. Indeed, I'm thinking of setting up a practice in America. New York's the place, advises Bray. They've everything there. But stay out of this town, cause, if you're looking to turn any profit. Bray, cries her father in a mock offended tone. Anyone with the necessary drive can make a go of it here, as Mr. Tox says in his Pennsylvaniad, 21st or 2nd book. A young man seeking to advance himself will get him to the nearest source of pelf, and few of these are more distinctly pelfier than long life, Queen of Schuylkill, Philadelphia. I was thinking more of the West, says Depew. Little or no medical equipment to weigh down one's progress. The necessary herbs in those wilds, so 'tis said, everywhere to be found, and the powers being already long known to Indian medicine men. Business opportunities await the alert practitioner, among red, even as white, customers. More likely, his uncle suggests, any doctors who are already there will run you out of town if they don't kill you first, because they don't want the competition. But it's America, sir. Competition is of her essence. Nobody here wants competition, Ives Lespark, re-entering, shaking his head gravely. All wish but to name their price and maintain it, without the extra work and worry all those damned upstarts require. More work for you, Nunk, supposes Athelma. We are like physicians. There's always work for us, as we treat the moral diseases, replies the attorney. Nor are we any more disposed than our brother doctors to meeting other folks' prices. Hence our zeal in defending monopoly. A form of sloth, notes the Reverend, that only brutality can maintain for long. Soon destroyed if 'tis not abandoned first. Rubbish, several voices pronounce at once. Looks as if I'll need firearms, reckons Depew. You know the uncle to see, then, advises Aunt Youth. Already your load increases, Bray puts in. A man oughtn't to be too weighed down. Franz told us we need bring but the proper gaze. Let us see. Be warned, cousin. He's magnetic, says Thelma. Most of Haworth, the Reverend has meanwhile continued, believe William Emerson to be a practicing magician. Sheep tenders have reported flights, usually at dusk, passages of shadows aloft that can only have been one of Emerson's classes out upon a field trip, for he is teaching them to fly. Toward sunset, when every least ruffle in the nap of the terrain is magnified as shadow, they'll be out looking for traces of Roman and earlier ruins. In the twilight they ascend one by one, dutiful pupils, caps tied firmly down, rust light upon the wrinkles in their clothing, to flock above the village, before moving out across the fells, following southwesterly the ley lines he shows them, sighting upon the Palatine residence at Bishop Auckland, whilst chapel spires, roadside crosses, prehistoric standing stones, holy spring heads, one by one in perfect line, go passing directly beneath. Until just at the river, over ancient Venovium, the flock will pause to regroup. He is teaching them to sense rather than see this line, to learn exactly what it feels like to yaw too much to its port or starboard. The ley seems to generate along its length an influence, palpable as that of Earth's magnetism upon a needle. That is, Dixon will avow years later to Mason, with every appearance of sincerity. I knew I could feel those lines. Bisley Church, recalls Mason, with a history of unending village meanness, false surveys, cursed wells, vicious hoaxes, ruined ceremonies, switched corpses, and on into stultification unending, traditional accounts of its construction suggesting, if not the intervention, then at least the cooperative presence of the devil, was meant for a field near Chelford. But each night the stones were removed and transported into a right line through the air at brisk speed to the church's present site. You can take a map, draw a line straight from the barrow near Great Badminton we call the Giant's Caves to the long barrow near the camp, and you'll observe it passes directly over Bisley, and might have been the church stone's route of transport, the ancient barrows being known sources of, and foci for, the telluric energies. Oh, well, our lays were never near as evil as that. Flying them was indeed quite pleasant, yet, yes, quite pleasant indeed. Over Wearside, here at nightfall, exactly upon this edge between sunlight too bright to see much by and moonlight providing another reading in coal blue or luminous bone, when spirits also are said in these parts to come out. So beneath them now do the Dark Age maps, the long, dogged Roman palimpsest, the earlier contours of Brigantum itself emerge as a certain combination of low angle, sun angle, and scholarly altitude above the fell. Coming up through the spoil heaps and the grazing, in colours of evening, in map-makers' ink washes, green walnut, well, the Brazil wood, lake, terra sienna, Cullen's earth and burnt umber, as Emerson meanwhile points out to his flock the lines of the Roman baths and barracks and the temples to Mithras, the crypts in which the mysteries were passed on to novices, once long ago invisibly nested at the camp's secret core, now open to anyone's curiosity. The moral lesson in this, declares Emerson, being, don't die. The Romans, he continues, in class the next day, were preoccupied with conveying force, be it hydraulic or military or architectural, along straight lines. The lays are at least that old, perhaps druidic, though others say Mithraic in origin. Whichever cult shall gain the honour, right lines beyond a certain magnitude become of less use or instruction to those who must dwell among them than intelligible by their immense regularity to more distant onlookers, as giving a clear sign of human presence upon the planet. The argument for a Mithraic origin is encouraged by the cult's known preference for underground temples, either natural or man-made. They would have found a home in Durham, here among pitmen and young Plutonians like yourselves. Indeed, let us suppose the earliest coal pits were discovered by Mithraist sappers. From the camp up at Venovia, poking about for a suitable grotto, who, seeking Ormazd, god of light, found rather a condensed blackness which hides light within, till set aflame. Mystical stuff, coal. Don't imagine any of you notice that, too busy getting it all over yourselves, or resenting it for being so heavy, or counting chaldrons, pretending it solid, when like light and heat it indeed flows, epur si muove, if yes like. Flow is his passion. He stands waist deep in the Tees, fishing, contemplating its currents, believing, as Dixon will one day come to believe of the Wear, that 'twill draw out the gout from his leg. Emerson has no patience with analysis. He loves vortices, may stare at 'em for hours, if he's the time, so far as they remain in the river. Yet once upon paper, he hates them, hates the misuse, and therefore hates Euler, for example, at least as much as he reveres Newton. The first book he published was upon fluxions. He is much shorter than Dixon. He has devised a sailing scheme, whereby winds are imagined to be forms of gravity, acting not vertically, but laterally along the globe's surface. A ship to him is the paradigm of the universe. All the possible forces in play are represented each by its representative sheets, stays, braces, and shrouds and such. A set of lines in space, each at its particular angle. Easy to see why sea captains go crazy. Godlike power over realities so simplified. The telescope, the fluxions, the invention of logarithms and the frenzy of multiplication, often for its own sake, that followed, have for Emerson all been steps of an unarguable approach to God, a growing clarity. Gravity, the pulse of time, the finite speed of light, present themselves to him as aspects of God's character. It's like becoming friendly with an erratic, powerful, potentially dangerous member of the aristocracy. He holds no quarrel with the Creator's sovereignty, but is repeatedly appalled at the lapses in attention, the flaws in design, the squanderings of life and energy, the failures to be reasonable or to exercise common sense, first appalled, then angry. We are taught, we believe, that it is love of the creation which drives the philosopher in his studies. Emerson is driven rather by a passionate resentment. Upon concluding their course of study, Dixon's class are brought in for a valedictory chat with Emerson. Your turn, Jeremiah. What's your aim in life? Surveyor. What? Fool! Staring yourself blind? Chaining through the glower? Another damned lamentations added to the list. Oink, oink! A headshake, a deferential grin, yet. These are busy times in Durham, sir. The demand for enclosures having made nabobs already of more than one plain dodman. It may happen overnight upon the proceeds of but one commission, for prudently invested. assuming you know what prudently is. Even so, there are only so many of these big spenders. What happens when you run out of squireocracy? Business can but increase. Between enclosure and subdivision, why, there's work enough in Durham the very day for 100 surveyors. Emerson gazes at nothing anyone can make out for a long time. You and your classmates all know, he murmurs at last, of my confidence in astrology. Yet here, facing the Plutonian counterexample, must my faith halt and tremble? Regard the self, born under the sign of the lion, destined thereby for optimism, ambition, power in the larger world. Yet what do I behold instead but a tepid, slothful mope, with the passions of a pit prop, whose dreams extend no further than siting gazebos for jumped-up mustard farmers from toll law, whose naked aim is but to accumulate money, ever more money, with as little work as possible. Tell me, what natal sign does that, I would have to say, exclusively suggest to you? The bull, mumbles Dixon, aware this is also Emerson's natal sign, but not wishing to seem too pleased with it. Don't think I haven't had the same thought, sir. But I looked for it in the parish records, and there I am, end of July. Happen you've somewhat in the region of Pisces I don't know about, for there's the sign of enclosure. Leonian fire kept ever within, artfully hidden. Aye, of course, that must be it. Why then advise me, as thou did from the outset, that my destiny was to inscribe the earth? Why show any of us the lays as thou did, and the great Roman streets, direct as shafts of lights, what thou called them? To weed out you who are too content with spectacle, Emerson replies. Of the pupils thou've declined to teach further, there are enough of us to form a club, complains Dixon. You wanted only the flying, Jeremiah. 'Twas never about flying. What else could it have been? Fret not. You will execute maps of breathtaking beauty, which is a form of light not at all dishonourable. Not what I have in mind, though I do thank thee, may I say, friend Emerson, now we're no longer master, and thou may not. I am still sir to you. Chain carrier, go. Some fool's stately ditches await thee. Not that many years later, here is Dixon in his teacher's parlour, trying not to look at, much less eat, the refreshments, observing instead the wordless messages between Emerson and Mayor, and speculating as to who might have owed whom what in arranging this conference, in which Dixon seems to be some sort of desirable package, if not prize. I am off to St. Omer, the priest says. The merciless environment of the children, the company of most of whom I would not willingly have sought. Is it your oath of obedience? The Geordie as if a comment upon Mayor's failure to seem Jesuit enough, prolonged only just short of giving offence. Mayor sighs. You've never met one of us before. Oh, aye, mind yourself, Dixon. You've studied Delitaria Expeditio et so forthia. Show some respect. Dixon, whose hat until now has been upon his head, Quaker style, sweeps it off smartly enough, blurting, "Pray thee, sir, my admiration for that great traverse is matched only by some of my feelings about Newton." It gets a wan smile. "I can imagine how you taught them that, William. The march from Rome to Rimini, across plains and over mountains, with galloping horses, telescopes, perhaps, knowing your ways, a few brigands as well. How could it fail to appeal to boys' imaginations? I should be taking down memoranda." "I've tried to scribble an angle or two whilst on horseback," says Dixon. "I stand amazed to hear of Father Boskovich's long poem of the tale at first hand, that he wrote as you went." "Indeed, and inscribe as fair as that produced upon an oak desk in a solid house far from the sea. 'Twill soon, I'm told, be printed in London. He did also alight now and then to attend to less literary tasks, such as measuring 2 degrees of latitude for the first time in history. But let me draw back from the brink of conjugate capital sin, and only add that I commend and celebrate mia caro Ruggiero as much as will satisfy you, and may God be with him in his present sojourn in London." His, as many supposed, secret arrival the year before last, having been intended to reassure the British as to the continued neutrality in the present war of the strategic Dalmatian port of Ragusa, Friar Boskovich's birthplace, as it happened. "What need of deity," growls Emerson, "in London, among the nabobs and philosophers? Stirring speeches of diplomats, glass of Madeira and a pipe at the jolly old Goose and Gridiron, election to the hallowed society itself. Wonderful stuff, why aye, yet what's his game now, Kit?" Nodding submissively, as if it had been coerced from him, a silent, "Very well." "Brother Ruggiero wishes to measure a degree in America." "How forthright! Look at this." "Latitude or longitude?" inquires Dixon. "Latitude, no further inland than necessary." Emerson snorts. "No Rome to Rimini this time." He'd settle for a fraction of a degree. "He'll get none, sir. This king will never allow Jesuit philosophers into British North America. Along either coordinate, be their motives unblemished as candle wax. And as to that, what are your motives? Why does the Society of Jesus, after 13 years, suddenly want to start measuring degrees of latitude again? How does it help you thump any more Protestants than you do already, basically?" "Mayn't we be allowed some curiosity as to the shape and size of the planet we're living on?" replies Mayor, unblinking, just short of questioning the civility of his host. "Why, aye, so may we all, but what your line-running mate Boscovich also wants, indeed openly enough for word of it to have reached even the tilth-stopped ears of this country philosopher, is a great number of Jesuit observatories flung as a web all over the world, it seems, modelled somewhat, I'm told, upon the provisions made for observing the transit of Venus. An obvious question arises. How often will emplacements like that ever be needed? Any celestial event close enough for it to matter which part of the earth 'tis observed from, being surely too rare to merit that sizable an investment. Therefore, Emerson's notorious therefore, intended, Dixon has at length discovered, to bully his students into believing there must have been some train of logic they failed to see. The inner purpose, rather, can only be to penetrate China, the rest being but diversion. Mayor, face forbearing, shrugs. This is the epoch of our exile, William. Day upon day, Jesuits are being expelled from the kingdoms of Europe. Maria Theresa, God save her, is all but our last protector. Our time here in the West may be more limited than any of us wishes to think about. Even within our faith, we are as itinerant strangers. We must consider possible places of refuge. He crosses his hands upon his breast. China. Emerson sputters into his tea. What makes you think the Chinese'll like you Jezzies any better than the Bourbons do? They might. They're not Catholic. Nor would yous have to worry about expulsion or suppression. Chinese much preferring to... Emerson makes a playful, head-chopping gesture. What charms as it frightens us plain folk, he goes on, is how Jesuits observe devotion so transcendent, whilst practising crimes so terrestrial. Their inventions as wondrously advanced as their use of them is remorselessly ancient. They seem to us at once benevolent visitors from a place quite beyond our reach, and corrupted assassins best kept beyond the reach of. Fair enough, says the priest. Yet, Jeremiah, here you've a choice at last between staying at home and venturing abroad. For though your faith teaches equality and peace, I've yet to meet one of you Quaker lads who hasn't the inward desire to be led into some fight. Lo, William, he blushes. Why, if authority and battle be your meat, lad, our outfit can supply as much as you like. The wine rations homemade, but all for free. The uniform's not to everyone's taste, yet it does attract the attention of the ladies. And you'll learn to work all the machines. So, have another look at the army that wrote the book. Take the path that ye should have took, and you'll be on your way. Get up and wipe off that chin. You can begin to have a whole new other life. Soldiering for Christ, reasonably priced. And nobody's missing the kids or the wife. So, here's the drill. Take the quill. Sign upon the line or anywhere you will. There's heretics aplenty and a license to kill. If you're a brother in the S of J. At the close of which the priest unhelpfully blurts, celibacy, of course, being ever strictly enjoined, if you're a brother in the... What? No fucking! Dixon, acting far too astonished, as some otherworldly accompaniment jingles to a halt. Why, happen our vow of chastity's the very thing that allows us to approach the transcendent. Happen, growls Emerson. It's what makes you so mean, methodical, and without pity. Rubbish. You like glamour jobs, travel, excitement, chance to look into any number of things you may have been wondering about, both inside and outside. Your success with the transit of Venus was a mark of God. that he remains in sympathy with our designs, which now are entwined with the projected boundary line survey in America. You are a perfect candidate for the position, a working land surveyor with astronomical experience. I can assure you of Calvert approval. That you come of a Quaker family must appeal to at least one major faction in Pennsylvania. And further, and to the morbid delight of certain devotees of monarchies past, your family is closely associated with Raby Castle, and thereby the melancholy yet darkly inspirational tale of Sir Henry Vane the Younger. What? Jacobites in America? Thought all that was over with, Dixon puzzles. Rather does the tale go on, accumulating power, told sweetly to Jacobite babes between the prayers and the lullaby, for Jacobites, like the forces invisible that must ever create them, will persist. The dispute did not end with Cromwell, nor Restoration, nor William of Orange, nor Hanovers. If English soil has seen its last armed encounter, then the fighting ground is now removed to America. Yet another use for the damned place, with weapons likewise new, including fanciful Stuart charters to American adventurers, launched upon futurity's sea like floating mines, their purposes not to be met for years, perhaps for more than one lifespan, their mischief incalculable. Young Vane was never a regicide, Dixon insists. Oh, the fool, needles Emerson. He was treacherous as a serpent. Yet round Raby, most believed 'twas the baseness of the father in pursuing the destruction of Strafford that caused the same fate to descend upon the son. 'Twas your Vane Junior gave Pym the notes, for heaven's sake, Emerson grumbles. A copy of a copy, says Dixon, useless as evidence. Wouldn't you call that at least a venial sin, friend Mayor? Wrong, Emerson feigning horror. Now we'll be here all week. The Jesuit, who has never mastered the European art of expressive shrugging, spreads his hands. What man may ever know how much the son may have shared his father's resentment when the barony of Raby went to Strafford? It seems a shabby enough motive for one man, let alone two, to feel it worth another's life. Young Vane was 27, about your age, Jeremiah. He had no idea of how easily those who pursue the business of the world may resort to murder. Perhaps he thought Pym and his people would use it only in private, as a negotiating point. Murder? Dixon perplexed. Judicial murder, whelp, Emerson glares. Words cost them nothing, scriveners only a little more, and lo, another bill of attainder or sentence of death, both in this our day, common as washing bills, for the human life figures as nothing, that being all the secret to governance upon earth. Whilst heaven, Mayor reminds him, sets the worth of a soul at everything. Why, aye, unless it be Indians of Paraguay, or Jews of Spain, or Jansenists across the way, and you know I'd love to sit about and talk of religion till hell freezeth over, especially Newton's views upon gravity and the Holy Ghost, though ye'll have to wait for my volume upon the subject, alas. Meantime, there being no ale in the house, as if there ever would be, mutters the Jesuit. And as, in any case, I find this standing bitch quite soon a source of fatigue, better, proposes Emerson, we repair to my local, the Cudgel and Throck. A moment Dixon has been dreading, for those who drink at this ale grotto of terrible reputation do so out of a melancholy advanced beyond his understanding. He has not quite made a connection between himself in his own public house habitude and these other but provisionally vertical blurs of sentiment, beyond a common fatality, for as many as might present themselves, of the doubtful comforts of sadness. Friar Mayor now removes his cloak, revealing the snuff-coloured coat and breeches of a middling town dweller. From an inner pocket he produces a costly Ramillies wig, shakes it out in a brisk cloud of scented litharge, and claps it on with a minimum of fuss over his ascetic's crop. There, I am now Mr. Emerson's distant cousin Ambrose, of godless London. Godless being just the note for the old cudge, nods Emerson as they go. 'Tis the popish that's not overly welcome. End of chapter.